Good afternoon. My name is Abbas Milani. I direct the Iranian Studies program here. Welcome to our first lecture series for spring 2017. For those of you who are Iranian American, Happy Nowruz, Ya Sal Nau Mubarak. For the rest of you, Happy Vernal Equinox. It is my truly distinct privilege to introduce our speaker tonight. In our many talks of the past, few have been the case when the researcher presenting his or her ongoing work is also the best embodiment of that work itself. The subject of our talk tonight is the contributions of the Iranian American community to America. And even a most cursory reading of Mr. Parvande's biography confirms my point about the singularity of his presentation and how the subject and object embody in the same person. When I heard him first offer an earlier iteration of this project, I knew immediately that we must have it as a part of the ongoing lecture series, particularly because we have, as you will see, we have added a number of new economic talks in our upcoming quarter, particularly because we have a new project called Iran Vision 2040 that has been focusing on the future of Iranian economy. You can go to our website and see two of their really remarkable already published papers. When I heard that presentation, I asked whether he would be willing to give it here at Stanford, and he graciously accepted. Mr. Parvande has over 30 years of experience in the high-tech sector. He joined Maxim Integrated in 1987 when it was a pre-IPO stage. During his 27-year tenure at Maxim, he has played a key role in the company's growth to a $2.4 billion a year company. I don't even know how many zeros that has, but I think it's a lot. As group president, he has led new product development activities and has had leadership responsibility for a number of business units whose aggregate revenues were approximately $800 million a year. He became Maxim's first chief technical officer in 2011. As chief technical officer, he championed motivation and led advanced technology development organizations that provided foundational technology for many of the company's products. In early 2015, he moved on from Maxim to pursue new professional challenges. He currently serves as a senior advisory capacity and consulting role in a broad range of companies, including Roche and its DNA sequencing unit, as well as multiple startups in the semiconductor, software, and systems areas. He has a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering from California Institute of Technology. He has approximately 30 issues or pending patents. And I just learned from one of the earlier results of their research that his 30 patents are part of the 40,329 patents pending or owned by Iranians. That is a remarkable fact, and I think that's why even Mr. Trump had to admit that Iranians have made a big contribution. And yet, in spite of the many valuable and potentially financially profitable things he could spend his time with, he has, with remarkable discipline, dedication, patience, prudence, and a truly disarming humility, decided to solve one of the most vexing questions facing the Iranian American community. Though much has been written about the significant financial, managerial, technological, and intellectual contributions of our community, the research, his research, using rigorous methods and the savvy and social commitments of the best of Silicon Valley, offers a chance for us to know, free from any hyperbole, the exact nature and dimensions of these contributions. Whether we are Iranians, Americans, or Iranian Americans, I think it is our good fortune to have so capable a community leader take on this now more than ever indispensable task. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, or as we would say in Iran, Mohandes Parvande.
Dr. Milani, I'd really like to thank you for the very kind and gracious introduction. Truly appreciate it, and also I'd like to acknowledge the fact that you have been a mentor and you have provided me and IACP with tremendous insight and advice. And so I really appreciate the fact that you have invited us to present tonight. And I'd also like to thank the Center, the Hamid and Christina Moaddam Program in Iranian Studies for hosting us tonight. What I'd like to talk to you about tonight is this project which we call the Iranian Americans Contributions Project. We've kind of stated the mission of this organization at the bottom. And there are several key topics that I'd like to cover tonight. First is, what is it that we're trying to accomplish and why does it matter? That's always a very key question to try to answer in any endeavor that one pursues. Next, I'd like to talk to you about how this organization, IACP, evolved. You know, it didn't really start out as this. It really went through a process of vetting and basically refinement in order to get to the stage that it's in, and it's still evolving. We are a nonprofit organization. We'll tell you about that. And then underlying the key aspect of this endeavor is that it's a technology-based activity. And I'll be describing some of that technology to you tonight. From which we can see some statistics, which you have seen some of already on the screen. We will give you an overview of the website and the content that we have, a little bit about where we're going. The way I want to emphasize, the thing I want to emphasize here is that this project started about a year ago, well before there was any possibility of a Trump presidency. So counter to what one might assume, this is not in response to the executive order. This was in response to what I felt was a vacuum. It was something that was needed for the Iranian American community for a variety of reasons that I'll get into. And so, you know, it's important to keep in mind that we're trying to create a platform here, and we're trying to go for the long game. We're not trying to be reactive in our approach. We're really after a long-term strategy here. So, and that's why the roadmap is important, because it's not a one-shot where we're going to get done in 6 months and then everything else is static from there. There's a long road that we're going to be pursuing, and I'd like to share that with you tonight. So, first and foremost, what we do and why it matters. And before I get into that, I'd like to provide with some things, some pieces of information that I think everybody here knows. I think we all believe that the Iranian American community has made some very significant contributions to the US and by extension to the rest of the world. The problem statement is that a lot of these contributions have not been brought into focus. You know, we hear anecdotes from here and there, and it's really not something that one could grasp and basically try to comprehend. It hasn't been organized in a fashion that we can understand, at least not for me. And the other element, of course, is we are an immigrant community, and there are a number of factors that affect our life in America. Not the least of which is the fact that there's been a 30-plus year, almost 40-year animosity and adversity between the governments of the two countries, between the US government and the Iranian government. And it's very natural, as a result of this animosity, that is going to have a ripple effect on our lives. It's going to impact our lives. Some of the more recent things that one can observe is that there's a rise in populism across the world. There is a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment. There's rhetoric about Muslims and, you know, what role they play in terrorist activities and so on. So there's a whole bunch of negative narrative that has formed that basically affects us. And that's, the fact is that's, you know, what happens when you let chaos rule, you know, when you're not trying to manage something, which I'm going to be describing. So there are two problem statements that I'd like to articulate. The first of which is that we are not in control of our brand. And what do I mean by that? So let's talk about brand. Actually, you know, many companies spend a lot of money on their brand. And a brand is essentially something that when, for example, you hear the name Coca-Cola or Tesla or what have you, it evokes a certain image, it evokes a certain emotion in you. And you associate that name with something. And the question is, well, what is it that is evoked when somebody is referring to Iran or Iranian American? Is the brand hostage taker? Is the brand terrorist? Is the brand Muslim extremist? Is the brand axis of evil? I don't know. There's all kinds of brands that can be associated with us. And that's what I mean by the fact that there's a negative brand. And so it seems to me that we as a community have had various activities, very admirable activities to basically try to shape and try to quantify the impact and to create this narrative around Iranian Americans. And I'll talk about what I perceive the shortcomings of those initiatives to be. So our brand is affected, and obviously it's been about the politicized nature of the debate about Iran. Another observation I'd like to make, and forgive me if this I'm trying to be a little bit on the edgy side of things. Is our brand the Shahs of what is it? Sunset? Sunset. Okay. That tells you how well versed I am in television. My apologies to the producers of the Shahs of Sunset. But is our brand the Shahs of Sunset? I don't know. I mean, is that a bad brand? I'm not saying it's a bad brand, but it's certainly a brand, right? And so, everybody's going to have their own opinion. Is our brand what I would call BGB, Benz, Gucci, and BMW? I don't know. That's another brand, and nothing wrong with it. But I don't think Benz, Gucci, and BMW are going to provide us with a huge amount of power and authority when we go in front of policymakers to make our case. Neither is the Shahs of Sunset. And there are many other possible brands that one can imagine, but I would venture to say that those brands are not the kind of brand that we would like to portray within our community. Apart from the issue of brand, there's an adjacent issue, which is there's a general lack of awareness about what has this immigrant community done. I personally came to the US about 40 years ago, and I lived through the hostage crisis. I went and got fingerprinted. I lived through many, many events over the last 40 years. And again, I feel that somehow our community has not really tried to understand our contributions. We know that we've made a lot of contributions, but it's not well understood. And it's not well understood by the first generation immigrants. If it's not well understood by the first generation, how can we expect the second and third generation immigrants to know, our children and their children? It's impossible. If we don't know, if we can't articulate in a concise and cogent fashion what it is that we've done, how can we expect the American public, our fellow citizens, to know? They're constantly bombarded by all kinds of images and rhetoric and so on. And our voice about what our contributions are being completely swallowed and completely quashed by all this other noise that comes around. And of course, if the American public is not aware, and if the American public is not sympathetic or empathetic to our situation, naturally the policymakers, unfortunately I found, don't have a lot of backbone, and they will not stand for what is right, usually. On many occasions they do, but unless there is a groundswell of support that basically backs up what a policymaker is trying to do, we're not going to be successful in changing policy. So it's really important for us to reach a very large array of constituencies, not only our own community, the next generation community, but the American public and then the policymakers. So this has to be something that has a lot of staying power, and it has to be a very strategic initiative for our community. So I would like to invite you to think of our brand as valuable contributors to the US. And I'm by no means a representative of any of you I'm just inviting you to think along with me about what would happen if we actually did that, if we portrayed our brand as valuable contributors to the U.S. And let's try to dissect the words. There are three key words here. The first of which is contributors. And one would ask, well, what does contribution mean? The way I look at it, there's two very basic elements of contribution. Maybe there's more, and you can all correct me if I'm wrong. But one form of contribution is in the form of service, where you are providing a value to your society that maybe you're not getting remunerated for, or compensated for in a very tremendous fashion. For example, teachers, elementary school teachers, or nurses in the playground, or therapists, or what have you, firefighters. They're providing a very valuable service. But they are not in the public eye. We are not lionizing these professions because they don't happen to make billions of dollars. We tend to hear about the $1 billion club, or whatever, the $100 million club, or the $1 million club, whatever. But the point is that there's a very essential element of our society and our contributions to America that is constituted within that service sector, where maybe you're not earning a lot of money. And then on the flip side of it, of course, there is service and contribution through creating prosperity and wealth. And, so people who are engaged in a variety of professions, where they create jobs and they create GDP, they add to the GDP of America, they are providing a service, they're providing a contribution. So we'd like to capture both of these elements of contribution. The next key word is valuable. And of course, when you ask somebody, well, how valuable is it, is something, we have to ask ourselves, well, how do I quantify value? Some things are easy to quantify, others are not. And we have to acknowledge that. But what we would like to do is we'd like to make sure that whatever data we present, that it's done very systematically and objectively. And one can then derive value from that. For example, we can convert employment data in various sectors to GDP contribution. So we want to have data that's objective and systematic. We want to create metrics around that so that we can basically summarize value for our audience. And in addition to that, we don't want to be a one-trick pony. We don't want to be just a bunch of numbers, because our community is not a bunch of numbers. Our community has stories to tell. Our community has life experiences to share with our fellow citizens. People who've gone through the border in the middle of the night to come to America. People who came on a student visa and had their funding cut off. There's all kinds of human stories that basically this community needs to articulate, and that story needs to come out. And so that's why I think that has value, because it shows what our community has gone through. And it also humanizes this community. We've decided to focus on the US, and it's a very pragmatic decision because the US has the largest Iranian diaspora population. And also, probably among most of the countries that the diaspora is in, the US is one of those few countries where the political winds are really not in our favor. For example, if you go to Sweden, Sweden has, I believe, a diplomatic relationship with Iran. I don't know that they've cut off their embassies, but they're certainly not yelling at the top of their voices and chanting death to one another. So there are European countries which are much more, at least on the surface, more receptive and have less animus towards Iran as a country. And that's why we focused on the US. Now, our technology and our capabilities can extend to many other diaspora communities in Europe. But again, our focus, in order for us to deliver a good product, in order for us to deliver something valuable, we need to focus on one country. Next, I'd like to talk about the paradigms. And the first set of paradigms that I'd like to talk about is really the approach that we're taking. And I've stated two approaches here, one of which is that we are using a paradigm of pride versus a paradigm of protest, and I'll expand on that. And the second is that we would like to have a galaxy view as opposed to a star view, and I'll expand on that. There's probably a third paradigm, which I should have added to this slide deck, and I didn't, and that is to be proactive versus reactive. And what I've observed is that something comes out of the policymakers, we all jump up and down and say, oh, it's not fair, and that's fine. You know, we have to react. There has to be an element of reaction. But we also need to have an element of proactivity. We need to build a foundation upon which we can anchor ourselves and weather these winds that we are faced with. So I'm going to talk about Pride and Galaxy first, and then I'll get into the other views of what we're trying to do. So just to demonstrate, what I believe our traditional methodology has been is that we lionize some very key members of our society, people who have become famous. They have done something great, and there's nothing wrong about that. But our approach has been primarily to focus on the stars, and we know the name of one star and another star, and each of us probably knows the names of, I don't know, about 50 stars, right? And when it comes to talking about these stars, you know, we can talk anecdotally about them, right? But the fact is that we are not just these bright shining stars that are very few in number. There's millions of Iranian Americans in the US. How do we capture that? How do we capture the galaxy picture? What I'd like to point out with this galaxy analogy is that when I look at this galaxy, it doesn't really matter to me what the name of this particular star is. It doesn't matter. I'm in awe of the whole constellation or the whole collection of these celestial bodies. It doesn't matter what the name of one of them is, but what matters is how much light does this collection shine, right? That's what we mean by the galaxy picture. This galaxy has stars within it that are very, very bright, and we know them. They're household names. But there are all kinds of other stars that are in various stages of formation. Some of them are currently, in the analogy of this, dust clouds that will transform into new stars. College students who've just graduated, or who've just come up with an idea, but they're not at the level where we recognize them. There are stars in here that basically provide warmth, but maybe they don't provide the light. They provide service, but they're not famous. They don't make a lot of money. The firefighter, the therapist, the school teacher, etc. So there's a huge variety and complexity and intricacy to this picture. And it's a shame if all we can do is we can only point to a few stars. Let's try to portray the full galaxy if we can. And that's the aim of IACP. So a little bit of review. We want to be deliberate and systematic in our approach. We want to make sure that the data that we collect and we portray is objective. It's based on something that we can say, here's the source of where we got this data from. We don't want it to be hearsay, because I believe that there will be many people who will want to find fault with the data that we provide. There are many naysayers, and that's normal. I'm not trying to play victim here, but there are many naysayers who will say, there's no way. So we want to be objective, quotable, authoritative. We want to stand behind this data, and we want to say, yes, we believe in this data. We want to provide a place where all of this data can be aggregated, so that if you're looking for data or anecdotes or whatever, you come to this one place where you can find it. We're using data mining technologies, because it allows us to be evergreen. It allows us to update our databases very frequently, because it's scalable, because we don't require a lot of human labor in order to update this data. We just allow the computers to go and search the web and other data sources. And we'd like to provide other forms of content besides data. We'd like to provide news items that relate to contributions. And there's and other resources where investigators and researchers have already done a lot of work already on what are the contributions of this community. So we'd like to be able to bring all of this stuff together. And of course, in order to put a human's face on this, we want to provide the life stories. So just to ask some questions, The kinds of things that we would like to know is, well, what kind of degrees does our community hold? What does that distribution look like? How many patent holders do we have? How many physicians do we have, et cetera? And I'm not going to read through all this. But the point is that we would like to cover as broad an array as possible. So we want to go into things that may not have been covered in other areas. For example, what are the what kind of small businesses have Iranian Americans created in the US? What have they done in the real estate sector, in the finance sector, in the sports? You know, there's a lot of sports people, in the arts, in the humanities, in philanthropy. There's a lot of philanthropists within our communities, and we'd like to shed light on what their overall contributions have been. So again, it's not a one-trick pony where we're just focused on, you know, very specific professions. We'd like to be as broad as possible. Now, this data, of course, when you have a computer gather all kinds of data, you're going to have millions and millions of records, right? And nobody's going to want to go through those millions of records. I mean, they're crazy if they want to. And it's not going to show the big picture, right? It's not going to tell the story. So what we need to do is we need to create a hierarchy. And the way I look at it is just think of it as a pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid has a lot of data, and then you can create different levels of abstraction as you go to the top of the data, to the top of the pyramid. And so, for example, one of those layers of abstraction is, well, give me a number. It's a GDP number. What has the Iranian American community done for GDP? Can we calculate it? And the answer is yes, we can. There are methods whereby we can do that. Or for example, we would like to be able to say, well, we just found that there's 9,000 physicians of Iranian descent in America. And if they have on average contributed 20 man-years of service, that's, you know, that's 180,000 man-years of service. 180,000 man-years of service. Multiply that by 1,000 visits per year. What is that? That's 180 million visits, patients that they've seen. 180, they've seen half the population of the US. They've seen half the population of the US, according to that math. Now, maybe 1,000 is an exaggeration. They've seen a quarter of them, or something, some significant number. Okay? So that's the level of abstraction that we'd like to be able to portray. And of course, and we will provide different layers of granularity so that people see that our data is actually based on reality and not some made up stuff. In fact, I was just thinking about how difficult a task this has been to actually collect facts. And I was thinking, if we lived in an alternate universe where alternate facts were significant, it would be so easy. It's a function on Excel called a random number generator. We could have just been done with this website. And we could have just put a whole bunch of random numbers in there and we would have been done. But the fact is that we want to portray facts. And that's why it's so hard. So I've already gone through this. We want to have GDP, job creation, and other metrics. And the question is, well, who is our audience? And we already talked about it. We want to tell the Iranian American community. We want this to be a platform that future generations of Iranian Americans, and there's very many of them. Like, for example, you know, there are our kids and their kids, and then there's new immigrants that are coming into the US. Well, I don't know if they're still coming to the US, but they're trying to come to the US. So they will benefit from this. So what we want to do is we want to basically make sure that we're creating a foundation for all of these people so that they can build upon it and they can anchor themselves to this. And it's really important. And we want to be able to showcase this to our fellow citizens and our policymakers. We have no shame about this. This is an important contribution that we're making, and we're not creating alternate facts. We're just reporting things as they are. Oh, and the other thing, of course, what we want to do is we want to empower and enable academic institutions who have a focus on diaspora studies to take this data and embellish it, do some research on it, create white papers, create thought around that, create maybe some input into policy, right? So we want to be an enabler, right? We don't want to just hold on to this data and just say, okay, this is ours, you know, forget it. We want this to be disseminated widely because it's a service to our community. That's what we want to do. And furthermore, we have positioned ourselves in a manner where the Iranian American organizations that are trying to influence policy are by definition political in nature. And I don't really know what the definition of politics is. In fact, Dr. Milani enlighten me on how difficult it is to distinguish between something that's political and non-political. But for the time being, please indulge my simplicity. There are political organizations and non-political organizations. We would like to think that we're a non-political organization, and we want to enable those political organizations who are influencing policy. We want to arm them with this data so that they can go off and do whatever they want with it, right? But we don't want to be in the fray. We don't want to be the ones who are shouting and demonstrating in the streets. We're just a data repository, okay? We're just a humble data repository. That's all we are. Just looking forward, of course, as we are able to gather this data, we will find, obviously we're finding names. It's possible for us in the long term to create networking opportunities within this community. So for example, if a college student wants to become a dentist and they don't know what the life of a dentist looks like, they can look up an Iranian-American dentist in their region and call them up, assuming that that individual wants to be known and assuming that they're open to being a mentor. So we want to be able to create these connections for our community. So mentor-mentee opportunities, there's opportunities for collaboration, et cetera, right? So there are many things that we haven't even envisioned yet in our roadmap, and we're still struggling with our first phase of what to do. So let me tell you a little bit about IACP and how it evolved. Initially, when we started this about a year ago, we had a very catchy name. We thought it was a really catchy, cool name. We called it IAM, Iranian Americans Matter. And and everybody was, rooting for that. Let's go with IAM, IAM, IAM. And then we held an event at our home where we invited about 50 or 60 Iranian Americans of our community, where we kind of brainstormed and we asked, well, what do you think about IAM? What do you think this organization should be? And there were several key things that came up. One of which was the notation of matter is very much associated with the movement of Black Lives Matter, which very much is a protest movement. We don't want to be a protest movement. We're not protesting anything, even though we would like to protest a lot of things, but we're not protesting anything. So we did not want to be a political, and by the way, I'm sorry for the people who are not speaking or not Farsi speaking, just turn next to you, you'll get a translation, hopefully. I don't know how you translate Rudarvasi. I don't think you can. I don't think it exists in English or any other culture. Anyway, so our whole notion was don't focus on matter because it's got political connotations. Focus on something that is less animated, that is more like an object. So we settled on project. So this is the Iranian Americans Contributions Project, not census project. Contributions projects. And that C in the middle is really, really important because some people will say, well, if you're reporting contributions, why aren't you reporting how many prisoners we have? Why aren't you reporting how many murderers we have? No, we're not a census. We're focused on contributions. Last time I checked, murder is not a contribution. So we don't want to talk about that. The second insight that we got is, we had people from all walks, all organizations, within the meeting, a lot of them active political organizations. And the first thing that they asked is, well, why do we need yet another organization? I mean, we're already brimming with organizations. We're overflowing. We don't know what to do with these organizations. And the key answer from that is that many of these organizations that have been in existence have a legacy. They have a following, and they have people who are not so enamored with them. So they've got friends and enemies. Okay, what can I do? I mean, I don't want to be part of the friend and enemy conversation. So we said we're going to create something free from legacy, no politics, and we want to build it ground up, and we want to be a data-centric data repository. And so that's a very key decision that we made to create this organization. But we want this new organization not to be a competitor to the existing organizations. We want this to be an enabler. We don't want to get into some kind of turf war with other organizations. And the third insight was, initially we were thinking, we were very optimistic. We're going to send out forms to the Iranian American population, and they will take the time to fill out the forms. And that was shot down very, very rapidly. That's not a scalable process, and so we said, okay, well, we got to use technology in order to accomplish this goal. And so that is why we're kind of a technology-based, and that's why we kind of grew up in Silicon Valley. And the value of technology, of course, is that we don't rely on individuals to come forward. We grab the existing data. It is highly scalable, and the data is always fresh. We don't have to worry about the data going out of date. So trying to draw a contrast between what we do, who we are, and what we are not, and what we don't do. So we are a data repository. We want to be open to all. But at the same time, that we're gathering data on, for example, the names. We have all kinds of names, right? But we don't want to publish any of these names because the privacy of our community matters to us. Some people don't want to be identified as Iranian Americans. Why do we want to out them? Right? Some people may be they might be working in Northrop Grumman, I don't know. And the fact that they're Iranian American may create some work issues for them or whatever. I don't really know. But again, the privacy of individuals is very important to us, and so is the security. And we've already addressed many of these things, and what we're doing is whatever data we publish, we don't have any names next to it, and I'll show you how that works. And of course, as I said, we want academic institutions to be beneficiaries of this data. I want to emphasize again that we are non-political and we have no religious affiliations. Now, unfortunately, well, fortunately or unfortunately, as I've gone through and I've talked to various groups, even though I say we are non-political, I find that some groups they're itching to make us political. And I'm saying, no, we're non-political. No, but this. No, we're non-political. I don't know how else to say it. Read my lips, we are non-political. We're not aligned with anybody. And they actually asked me to put that on our website, that we're not aligned. Anyway, so that's a different thing. So it's very interesting what kind of characters I've had to deal with in this quest to provide a service to our community. And as I said, we want to complement other Iranian organizations. What we're not a lobbying organization. We are not going to be writing opinions because opinions are subjective in nature. We want to be objective as much as possible. We're not the ones to advocate for policy change. We're going to provide the data upon which somebody can act and lobby for policy change. And again, we don't want to compete. Now, our status is very simple. We're a 501c3. We got our status on May 19th of 2016. So we are a charitable educational organization. And that is what our charter is. And basically, the fact that we're providing data is a form of education. Now, I wish the laws were different because then if we were an entertainment organization, then we could maybe use the alternative facts and use the random number generator just for kicks. But unfortunately, the laws are such that, well, not unfortunately, fortunately, the laws are such that we need to abide by being an educational and honest organization. On the technical front, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Professor Yahya Tabesh at Stanford, who basically when we were brainstorming with him, and some of his students, he said, well, guys, why don't you try some data mining? And, he introduced me to a few people, one of whom was Mohsen Hejati, and another was a friend of Mohsen's who's Hamid Tabatabai. Both of them are graduates of Sharif University and former students of Professor Tabesh. And these two gentlemen have been kind of the engine behind the data mining that we've done. I won't bore you with all the technical details. Actually, there's not a lot of technology here. We collect data, we store data, and then we display it. But what we do, however, is we have identified about 200,000 unique last names of Iranian origin. 200,000 unique last names. And that repository tells us, for example, in our algorithms, we know what is the probability of this name being Iranian. Because not all names are Iranian. So for example, as I said, there are names like Lotfi or Moradi. Now, Lotfi can also be found in some Arab countries. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% Iranian, even though we found some Iranians. But, so what we do is we assign a probability factor to each of these last names. And what we've done is we've searched on the highest probability names, highest Iranian probability names to do our search. So basically, what we do then is we go to data sites where the information is public. So for example, you can go to Google Scholar, or you can go to LinkedIn, and you can also purchase data sets where people have to get a certain certification, like physicians have to get a certification in order to practice. Their name's in a database. Dentists the same way. People, CPAs the same. There's all kinds of professions that need to get a certain form of certification. We can purchase that data, which includes Iranian and non-Iranian names, and then we can use our last name filter to basically identify which one of them are which. So that's basically what we do. Now, there's a huge repository of information that we haven't really tapped into. There's a tremendous amount of information that we have not gotten around to crawling. So this basically describes what we want. The other thing that we do, and it's very important for us, is we also look at the first names, and we provide a male or female gender assignment, and I'll show you why that's important. It's important because we want to show what role women play in our society. It's very important for us to be able to break those stereotypes about what's going on within the Iranian American community. We don't want to be lumped into a certain form of perception. So we're extracting the data. We've gone through the USPTO, for example, US Patent and Trademark Office, and a variety of other things. And then, of course, what we want to do is we want to take this data and put it in a form, as opposed to having a table. We want to be able to visualize this data, and I'll put some demonstrations of it for you. So our website, we take two approaches to our website. There are two views of the Iranian American community. The first of which is the analytical or the statistical view, the data-driven view, right, which is what we do through data mining. And then the second portion, which I'm going to talk about, is the human view, the human-centric view, which is equally important, because if all you're presenting to your audience is just a bunch of numbers, and they don't hear about the stories, they will not empathize. We need empathy. We need data and we need empathy. So we need to have a dual-pronged approach, and that's what we're trying to do. So just to provide you with a high-level summary of what we have done so far, we have identified 4,000 scholars. We know that this is an underestimate, and I'll share with you why. But these 4,000 scholars that we've identified through Google Scholar have a cumulative number of citations of 2.4 million citations. That's a lot of citations. It means that their work has been worthy of being cited. So that's a badge of honor, if you will, in terms of how many citations they have. We found 9,000 physicians. We know that there's about 226 different specialties within the category of physician, and Iranian Americans occupy about a half of that. They have specialized in about approximately half that number. There are 12 specialties in dentistry, 12 out of 12, 3,400 dentists. There's 10 specialties in pharmacy. There's 8 out of 10 are Iranians cover that, and about 1,000 pharmacists, et cetera. You can read the rest of this thing, and then I'm also going to show you some graphs with regard to the number of patents we have and how rapidly these things are growing. Now, I've put some things on the bottom here, which is that we did our first mining on attorneys in California. We found 2,800 of them, but there are databases that cover US-based attorneys, the full range, and so that's something in process. And we actually got some very interesting data, which I'm not able to publish right now, but we've gone through databases that show people who are on the boards of directors of companies, whether they're public or private companies, and there's numbers associated with that hopefully we'll be able to share with everybody very soon. So there's a roadmap, there's a whole bunch of other things that we need to do, which I haven't listed here. And then we went through LinkedIn, and we found about 230,000 entries on LinkedIn. You can see the distribution of these of the entries on LinkedIn. Of course, LinkedIn is by definition, related, or it's much more focused on professionals. So it doesn't necessarily have all the different categories of people, but within the professional community that uses LinkedIn, this is what the breakdown looks like, and that can be visualized. That has been visualized. The other thing that we've done is we've gone through the database for the California state employees. That's an open database. And so basically we've been able to determine that there are people who are serving in a number of different areas, whether it's in the public services, DMV, transit, et cetera, and law enforcement, attorneys, correctional, and police, academia, of course, and then in other areas of endeavor. So again, we've tried to cover as many professions as possible. So going to our website, this, and I'll show a live example of this. Basically, this is the work that we did on Google Scholar. We found 4,000 scholars. You can see approximately where they're located and which universities they're associated with when you put your cursor over it. And when you put your cursor over it, you also see how many scholars are within each university center. I'll show that in live format very soon. This is a histogram of the citations. So the sum total is 2.4 million citations. And then on the horizontal axis is the number of citations. So basically, there's actually one person who's got multiples of tens of thousands of citations of work, right? So it shows the diversity of all the, what this work consists of. And then we also have a gender distribution. Within the scholar field, 20% of the people who've published on Google Scholar that we found have been women, and then the rest have been men. Now, we know for a fact that we are undercounting because, in fact, one of the emails that I received was from a gentleman from a university in Chicago, and we had said that on our database that we only have one person in the University of Chicago. And he said, no, we got 5, and here's the names, right? So I know we're undercounting. Part of it is because our last name directory is not complete. Part of it is because not everybody puts their work on Google Scholar. So there's a whole bunch of issues that we need to resolve. But what I do know is that we're undercounting these contributions. Then we did the physicians, and you can see the heat map, and I'll show that to you live. So we've got 9,000 physicians. 34% are female and the rest are male, and you can see the color coding as to where they are, where their concentration is. We found one physician in Wyoming. We really want you to go visit that physician. They're very lonely. The physicians have specialties that have been shown here. We're not showing all the specialties on the horizontal axis. Because again, there's about 117 of them that we need to show, and there's no way that this would fit. But this data can be used in order to derive the amount of service these physicians have provided, what is their GDP contribution, and what is the employment contribution that they've provided as a result of being a physician. We've got 2,800 attorneys, and a good number of them are in the LA area, so I would advise you not to go down there. But I think there's about 1,400 of them in LA. But just watch yourself. The number of admissions. So this shows the number of admissions to the California State Bar, and it shows a very interesting thing here, which is that this is growing very, very rapidly, and you can see that it's growing very rapidly after 1990. And it's certainly very robust in the year 2000. And one observation that one would make is that the first generation Iranian Americans that came to the US did not want to come here to go to law school because our English was not that good. It wasn't, it wasn't a profession that, many of us were pushed into as kids, right? We were pushed into engineering and math, sciences, et cetera. And so I think a lot of this growth is really from the second generation Iranians, right? So if you look at the second generation probably, is somewhere in here. And the other interesting thing about this is that as you look at the cumulative number, so this is the integral. I don't know if this is the integral anyway. I don't know what this is. But obviously the population is growing, and it's a very substantial portion of the California Bar Association. Interestingly, about 42% of the attorneys in California are women, right? And we couldn't really determine the gender of about 6.5%. And that's because there are certain names that either are not in our quote dictionary, so we don't really know how to match them, or they are names that can be used in dual form. So we basically said we don't really know what the gender is. These are the universities from which they graduated for law school. I'm not going to go through that too much. This is all available on our website, and this is the undergrad schools that they attended, so you can see where they went. We basically looked at the California state government, so we have people in academia. There's a footnote here at the bottom of our website which says that this is an overestimate because the state of California does not have very organized databases. So what they are covering is they're covering multiple years. I think they're covering 2 years. So we looked at an aggregate of 2 years and filtered on that. And so some departments have data and others don't. And so it's kind of like, reminds me of Iran. But so anyway, so that 10,000 people in academia is an overestimate, probably by a factor of 2. We have people in law enforcement, maybe about 700 of them, and in public services. And there's many other categories, you know, so we can go around this as well. The other thing that we did is we looked at the USPTO and basically filtered from 1980 all the Iranian last names. And this color code is not very surprising. There's a very large density of patents that were issued in the state of California. And then other major states such as Texas and other areas also had, you know, some proportion. Also the Northeast had a reasonably large proportion, and you can see that live on our website. But here's one that I'm completely awestruck by, which is the number of patents per year. And you can see on the left-hand curve how rapidly this is rising. This is amazing. This is an exponential rise. And it doesn't show any sign of slowing down. At least I'm not seeing any kind of plateauing. And the rationale I would have is that many of the people who basically stayed in the US probably stayed after 1979. You know, they were students, such as myself. You know, a student, you know, you graduate from college. I graduated in 1982. It takes you 5 to 10 years of practice before you actually become good at anything, so that you can write patents. So in the case of my generation, you know, we would have probably started generating patents in the 1990s. And then, of course, as you mature in your career, you know, the number of patents goes up, and so, you know, that all makes sense. It's actually, it seems very interestingly that many of these things are somehow correlated to some of the major events that happened in our country. But again, the point is that this is a tremendous amount of contribution. None of us really knew this. And how do we quantify this? What is the value of that patent? We don't know. I mean, one of the most simplistic models is that each patent is worth $250,000. But who knows? I mean, there could be billion-dollar ideas in these patents, and we don't know about them. We looked at LinkedIn, and again, it's probably best to show this live. So again, we have a heat map that shows where about 40% of the Iranian American population that we identified lives in California. And you know, and then there's 5 states which constitute the majority of the population based on our search on LinkedIn. So basically, my last name was not in the original list of 200,000 that we picked. So I asked the team to put my name in and see what they would find. And basically, the way we display this information is, you know, normally speaking, my picture would be here and my name would be here, but our default state is that all of this is going to be blanked out. We're going to have this anonymous. Unless somebody comes in and says, no, I want you to publicize my name. I want you to come out and you know, name me. And there are many reasons why people would want to do that, and I'll get into that. But what it does say is that I live in California, specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area, that I'm in the semiconductor field, that I'm a senior consultant at Roche Diagnostics. It gives me a score of 100% male, which is very encouraging, and I'm glad that our team is not playing games with me. Joking aside, there is a reason why there's a probability assignment. And that is because, again, as I said, certain names are dual gender, and certain names are not in our dictionary, so we don't really know what to call it. And it also says that there's a 99% chance that I'm Iranian American, because they couldn't find any other Parvarandez elsewhere in the world. And they said, well, if there's only, you know, if I can't find any other Parvarandez elsewhere in the world, and it's an Iranian name, well, then the guy must be Iranian. So I'm thrilled about that. Here's an overview of what the interactive map looks like, and it's really best probably to show this, but you can see that, you know, there's various categories. There's engineering categories, healthcare, et cetera. I'm not going to bore you with all those details, and then when you can dig into that and you can get more dynamic view of it. Now, the thing about the profiles that we found on LinkedIn is that about 23 or 41% of them are women. Again, that is such a great flag for us to wave and say and celebrate the contributions of women in our society. And I'm sure it's going to be a surprise to many who don't know about Iran and Iranian Americans. So I would encourage you to go and visit this website, and in fact, I'm going to do that right now just to show you what we have. And so what you're going to find is this is our homepage. We've got contribution stories. Let's just do some explore data, and I'll show you what the Scholar thing does. So what you can see is that, I just went on the University of Notre Dame, and we found 8 scholars at the University of Notre Dame, right? So this is a dynamic map that you can basically explore as you wish. And then there are other things, for example, on LinkedIn, what you can see is that we have the populations. So about 41% of the people that we found on LinkedIn reside in the state of California. And of that 41%, approximately 41% or 42% are female, and the rest of them are male. And this is a dynamic map. So you go to another state, just keep your eye on this circle on the right-hand side. You will see that it will change a little bit. So Wyoming has 0.02%, so please go and visit these guys. They're desperately lonely there. So 0.2% of our population is in Wyoming. But the distribution of male versus female is still astonishingly very similar. And of course, you can dig into the various disciplines here. So I just clicked on engineering, and you can see what all the different sub-disciplines of engineering are and so on. So anyway, so that is kind of a very high-level view of the website where we are looking at the data. Now, the next key element is sharing life stories, and this is what we've done. We want to really appeal to the heart and provide these personal stories. And I need to make an acknowledgement here, which is that this series of stories that we basically were conducted by a journalist by the name of Jahandad Memarian. We have 37 of these interviews. This was originated in an organization called West Asia Council, whose president is Alidad Mafi Nizam. And basically, as a result of that collaboration, they decided to transfer all of that knowledge, all of that content to IACP, because IACP had a much better defined mission, and it made a lot more sense. So that is a sense of collaboration that was created there. And what we want to do with all these interviews is that they're very time consuming. We can only do 3 interviews per month. It takes a lot of time to prepare the questions and write the articles and so on. And so we've posted all these things. And just to provide you, and we have pictures and all that kind of stuff. And this shows a high-level view of what we've done. So these are the interviewees in the black, and then the disciplines that they're in. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to spread it around. We really want to show that the Iranian American community is highly diverse in their field of endeavor, in their fields of endeavor. So we have people that are writers and directors, cybersecurity, entrepreneurship, law, academia, executives, electrical engineering, demography, earth sciences, et cetera. So this shows a huge amount of that we have touched almost every facet of these various disciplines. And when you look at a very higher level visualization of this, we have endeavored to be approximately 50-50 in our coverage of men and women, because we think it's important for us to provide that kind of gender balance. And then it's not a surprise to many of you that 54% of the people that we've interviewed are in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics areas, 16% in entrepreneurship, and 30% in other. And our goal is to focus on the other: artists, sports people, etc. We want to reach out to the non-traditional Iranian, demographic, if you will. All right, now where are we headed? We have 5 phases. We are currently in phase 1, where we are focused on data mining. Now we're doing the stories, Huffington Post stories, in parallel because it's not the same resource, but we are focused on data mining. Phase 2 is what we want to enable a capability such that whenever there's a news article about an Iranian American, and it's not defamatory, it talks about contributions, we want to select those and we want to show them. So we will provide a link to those. So for example, there will be people who are publishing in peer-reviewed journals. Of course, we got to be careful about which peer-reviewed journals we select. And then we want to put some context around it. So just publishing a journal link is not sufficient. We need to show, well, what does this mean? Why is this important? So that's our next phase. The other thing that we want to do is, well, we are interviewing people through the Huffington Post series, but it's not a very scalable process. So how can we enable members of our community to post their own stories, to put their pictures and say, this is what I do, this is what I've contributed, and here's my life story. We want to democratize this process of putting out those stories. Now, the thing that I've noticed is that one of the things that is missing in many of these endeavors that have happened before is that a lot of these stories are not searchable. So let's say you got 4,000 stories. Who in the world is going to go look at 4,000 stories, right? It's not, you can't do it. But if you say, well, I would really like to hear the stories of philanthropists, the 4,000 stories comes down to 100. And then I want to hear the stories of the philanthropists that are in this area, or in this area of endeavor. So we want to make this something that is searchable and basically allows people to play around with it. In phase 4, we said that all of our data is anonymous. We want people to be able to opt in. We want them to check a check mark through whatever mechanism, such that they say, I want to be known. Some of them want to be known because they're proud to be Iranian American, and good for them. Others want to be known because it's good for their business. It's a dentist, it's a psychiatrist, it's whatever, and they would like to have customers that are Iranian American so there are business reasons why they want to become non-anonymized and so on. And so we need to enable that, and then finally we envision that there's a networking capability, but that's far away, and I'm not going to bore you with all that detail. There's a huge amount of stuff that we can do, and we're just focused on phase 1 at this point. Now, this is the last part of what I'm going to be talking about, and when we reflect on the choices that we have as a community, we need to be very specific. We need to have a purpose. We can't just be sitting around and bemoaning the world, right? That this executive order is unfair. Why are they labeling us this way or that way? And we need to be cognizant of the fact that arrows are being shot in our direction. What are those arrows? Examples. Well, you're from Iran. That's the first arrow. That's not good, actually, in the US. You're an immigrant, with all this populist sentiment that's sweeping the world. That's not good. You're from a Muslim majority country. Even if you're not Muslim yourself or don't have, very deep religious beliefs, but you're going to be labeled in some way, and that's a stigma for you. You're part of the axis of evil. You are a terrorist. You took some hostages. In fact, when I was in school, during the hostage crisis, one of my friends turned over to me and said, so when are you going to release the hostages? And I said, it's not under my control. I mean, I'm not, I can't pick up the phone and just, plea with them to please release the hostages. I mean, the understanding, and I went to a pretty darn good school, you'd think that people would think about that stuff, but unfortunately they didn't. And so, we've all been, these arrows have been shot at all of us. Okay, we have been, we've been pointed at in a variety of different ways. And it's no secret that being of Iranian heritage is not the best thing in the world in terms of, your standing. And we need to rectify that. Of course, the message here is that we need to be proactive. We cannot be reactive. We need to be proactive. We cannot be mustering our energy when there's an executive order. We need to have mustered our energy prior to an executive order so that the executive order does not materialize. We need to be there with a strong foundation to say, how dare you do such and such? We need to build that foundation. We need to own our future. This effort with IACP is for our community. Frankly speaking, I'm a technologist. One would say I have no business being in this nonprofit business at all. And that's probably true. I've got other things I could be doing, like I could be inventing stuff. But I chose to do this because it's important, and I think it's vitally important for our community. And what we've proposed, what we've shared with you, is a platform. This is not a one-off kind of thing. This is not a short-range plan. This is a long-range plan that we're trying to implement. And it's strategic as a result. It's not a tactical thing. It's a strategic initiative. And we believe that this is going to have benefits for multiple generations. The people who came here 50 or 60 years ago to the people who are just arriving, either through the border or by birth, right? So it covers the new immigrants as well as the people who are being born into Iranian-American families. And we believe that this platform has many benefits that we have not imagined yet. We'll leave that up to you to define where we go in the future. And with regard to the choices, I started out by saying that, well, we have certain choices. And I think when we've looked at what those choices are, I break it down into several categories. The first of which is that we can pray that nothing is going to happen to us. You know, just be very optimistic and just keep, you know, taking on the Zoloft and whatever else and just, you know, rely on drugs and whatever. Well, I didn't say rely on drugs, I said pray. So just forgive me for saying rely on drugs, but pray. That nothing is going to happen to us and, you know, things are going to all be fine. The second strategy is that we can hide, and I've seen that. We're not Iranian, we're Persian, we're Turkish, we're Italian, whatever. You know, pick your community of the day. So that's the hiding strategy, which has worked for many of us. We can be in denial, you know, hey, nothing's going to happen to us, you know, this is all bogus, this is all being blown out of proportion. Or we can just throw up our hands and say, well, you know, we've been around here for 40 years, we've heard this all, we haven't been able to mobilize, we haven't been able to get our act together before, we've had a lot of infighting. Why do you think that this one is going to succeed? I don't. It's up to us. Up to everybody in this room and whoever's listening to this talk. It's up to us to make this succeed. I'm not guaranteeing success. We know that there's a lot of infighting. There's no guarantee that this is going to work, but we are hopefully positioned this in a way that it will work. So we talked about the passive or easy path. The active path, which is what we have been talking about here, is that we have, again, on the active path, there are three strategies, one of which is protest, the other one is to defend, you know, by building ourselves a brand, and the third is to persuade. And of course, some of these, the line of demarcation between these things sometimes gets blurry. But I would venture to say that we can protest all we want, but if we got a lousy brand, if our brand is Yugo, we're not going to win. We need a Mercedes-Benz brand or something like that. We need a, you know, really Tesla brand, or we need an Apple brand. You know, we don't need, you know, some lousy brand. So if you want to protest and if you want to win in your protest, you better have a good brand, right? So it's a prerequisite. So this is not a waste of time. This doesn't say that all the work that all the other organizations are doing in terms of protest is futile. No, this is a complementary effort to all the work that they're doing. I'm advocating that we build our brand, that we build that shield, again, because this is a strategic effort, it's a long-term effort, it's something that cannot be done just like that. It takes a lot of effort to do it. And then I also say, and I also claim, that in order for us to be persuasive, in order for us to stand in front of a policymaker and say, hey, you know, fight for us, we have to have a good brand. Right? So this is all about building that brand. And I don't want our brand to be the Shahs of Sunset. That's my personal opinion. You guys can figure out what your brand is or what you would like to stand behind. But IACP is trying to brand, is trying to create the narrative, is trying to provide the data for the argument that we are valuable contributors to the US. That is what we're trying to accomplish. So my invitation to you is focus on our brand, help us build it, and we will reach out to you on how to build it, because part of what we need to do is we need to reach out to fellow Americans. If we just confine our knowledge to a very small handful of people that know about this, what good does it do? This has got to spread. And you can also help us build it by, when we are ready, by providing us with volunteer work. We're not quite there yet. We would like you to own it, know about this, and talk about it. This is yours. It's not mine, it's yours. and finally defend it. So I would like to acknowledge our team. This has been a team effort. First and foremost, our board of directors, Faraj Aloi and Michael Shadman, have been very instrumental in providing some of the guiding principles with regard to how we've positioned ourselves. I'd like to give a tremendous amount of acknowledgement to our software development team, Hamed, Tabatabai, Mohsen, and Pejman, who's just recently joined the team. Our creative design team, Nima Dehghani and Dorsa Jalalian, who I think are here, and also Pejman is here as well. The Huffington Post series has been prepared by Jahandad Memorian and Alidad Mafi Nizam. Stacey Conti, who was our honorary Iranian within our group, has been taking care of the finances. We have outreach and research. We have a legal person, and also we have been lucky to have asked to get the support of Mark Zandi, who is the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, to help us convert our data into GDP and employment. So we've got a very well-known and well-respected individual who will translate this data into something hopefully meaningful for the rest of our fellow citizens. These are the pictures. You can find these pictures on our website, or we will be putting these on the website. And my ask from you is spread the word. We have some leaflets at the entrance to this. Please feel free to take one. It has this address on it. And when you go on this website, you're going to be able to see our Facebook page and all kinds of other fun and good stuff that you can explore. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for your attention.